Somewhere beneath Midtown Manhattan, about 40 feet below the rush hour crowds and the hot dog vendors and the tourists taking photos of Times Square, there is a man waking up at exactly 0500 hours. He does not have an alarm clock. He does not need one. 20 years after his last deployment, his body still runs on military time. His eyes open in total darkness, and within 3 seconds, his hands have already found the flashlight he keeps in the same position every single night. Left side, 6 inches from his head, angled toward the tunnel wall. This is not random. This is how he was trained. His name is not important to this story. He asked that we not use it, but what is important is what he represents. A decorated United States Army veteran, a man who served 2 combat tours overseas, who earned commendations for his service, who came home to a country that shook his hand at the airport and then forgot he existed. Today he lives inside an abandoned service tunnel connected to the New York City subway system. And the skills that kept him alive in a war zone are now the same skills keeping him alive underground. This is not a feel-good story. This is a story about survival, about failure, and about what happens when the most powerful military in human history trains a man to endure anything and then gives him nothing to come home to. To understand how someone ends up living in a tunnel beneath one of the richest cities on earth, you have to understand the tunnels themselves. New York City sits on top of a sprawling underground network that most people never think about. Hundreds of miles of subway tunnels, abandoned rail lines, maintenance corridors, steam pipe systems, and utility passages run beneath the streets of Manhattan, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. Some of these tunnels are active, with trains roaring through every few minutes. Others have been sealed off and forgotten for decades. Entire stations that were built, used for a few years, and then closed sit empty in the darkness, their tile walls still intact, their platforms collecting decades of dust. And inside those forgotten spaces, people live. Estimates vary wildly, but outreach workers and journalists who have spent time underground suggest that anywhere from several hundred to a few thousand people occupy tunnel spaces across the city at any given time. Some have been down there for months. Others have been underground for years. A few have been down there so long they have built structures that resemble actual apartments, with furniture, electricity tapped from nearby junction boxes, and walls decorated with personal belongings. The conditions are brutal. Temperatures in certain tunnel sections can swing from freezing in winter to over 100 degrees in summer, depending on proximity to steam pipes and ventilation shafts. Rats are constant, not a few rats, colonies of them bold enough to walk across a sleeping person without hesitation. Standing water collects in low point, stagnant pools that breed mosquitoes and bacteria. The air quality is poor, thick with particulate from train brake dust and decades of accumulated grime. And the darkness is absolute, not dim, not shadowy. Pitch black in sections where no infrastructure lighting exists. The kind of darkness where you cannot see your own hand in front of your face. For most people, spending a single night in these conditions would be terrifying. For a man trained to operate in hostile environments with zero visibility and unpredictable threats, it is simply another mission. He joined the Army at 19. He grew up in a housing project in East New York, Brooklyn, a neighborhood where the options available to a young black man in the early 2000s were limited in ways that are easy to describe and hard to truly understand unless you lived them. The block he grew up on had more funerals than graduations. His mother worked 2 jobs and still could not keep the heat on every winter. His older brother was in and out of Rikers Island before he turned 21. The recruiting office on Fulton Street felt like the only door in the hallway that actually opened somewhere. The military offered structure, income, purpose, and a way out. He took it without hesitation. Basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia. Infantry specialization. 2 deployments to the Middle East where he spent months operating in environments designed to kill him. Desert heat during the day that could reach 130 degrees inside an armored vehicle. Freezing temperatures at night that made your fingers too stiff to operate a rifle properly. Improvised explosive devices buried under every road. Snipers positioned in windows that all look the same. Sleep deprivation measured in weeks, not days. He lost friends over there. Not in the abstract way civilians talk about loss. He watched men he had eaten breakfast with that morning get loaded into body bags by lunchtime. He carried a sergeant he had known for 3 years to a medevac helicopter and never saw him again. He remembers the weight of that man across his shoulders more clearly than he remembers his own graduation day. Those memories do not leave, they live in the body. They show up at 3 in the morning, when the tunnel is quiet, and the darkness feels like it is pressing down on his chest. They show up when a subway train screams past on the active line 200 yards from his shelter, and the sound hits the same frequency as an incoming mortar round. He came back. A lot of guys he served with did not. And then everything started falling apart slowly, the way it does for so many veterans. Not all at once, not dramatically, just a slow, grinding erosion of stability that took years to complete. The VA had backlogs. His disability claim sat in a queue for over a year. Paperwork got lost. Appointments got rescheduled. The transitional housing program he qualified for had a waiting list that stretched months into the future. The job market wanted skills that translated neatly into civilian language, and I can secure a perimeter and assess threats in zero visibility conditions does not look great on a resume for an office job. He got hired at a warehouse in Queens, got let go after 2 months when his hypervigilance made his supervisor uncomfortable, got hired again at a security company, lost that job too when a panic attack during a fire alarm sent him into a full combat response in the middle of the lobby. He couch surfed for a while, stayed in shelters when he could get a bed. The shelters in New York City are their own kind of dangerous, and a man with combat-trained instincts does not sleep well in a room full of strangers with unpredictable behavior. He stopped going to the shelters. He found the tunnels. And this is where the story shifts from tragedy to something stranger and more complicated, because when he found the tunnels, he did not simply survive. He adapted, he engineered, he applied every single thing the United States Army taught him and built a life underground that most people would not believe exists. His shelter is not a pile of blankets against a wall. It is a constructed living space built using principles he learned in field engineering courses during his service. He identified a section of tunnel with specific characteristics: elevated ground to avoid water pooling, proximity to a ventilation shaft for air circulation, distance from active rail lines to reduce noise and vibration, a narrow access point that is easy to monitor and difficult for anyone to approach without being detected. He built walls using salvage plywood and construction materials sourced from dumpsters near renovation sites across Manhattan. The structure has a defined entrance, a sleeping area, a storage section, and what he calls his operations corner, which is where he keeps his supplies organized in the exact same grid system the United States Army uses for field logistics. Everything in its place, everything accounted for. He can find any item he owns in complete darkness within seconds because the layout never changes. Water is the hardest problem underground. There is no running water in abandoned tunnel sections, and the standing water that collects in low points is contaminated with chemicals, biological waste, and heavy metals. He solved this using techniques adapted from his military survival training. He collects condensation from ventilation infrastructure using plastic sheeting angled into collection containers. He filters water through layers of sand, gravel, and activated charcoal packed into cut plastic bottles. On good days, he supplements this with bottled water from food pantries above ground. He knows the filtration system is imperfect. He knows the water is not truly clean, but it is better than drinking from puddles, and it is a system he can maintain consistently. Fire discipline underground is critical. Open flames consume oxygen in enclosed spaces and produce carbon monoxide that has killed tunnel residents who did not understand the risk. He uses small controlled heat sources, tea-light candles in ventilated areas only, a portable camping stove with fuel he rations carefully, stretching a single canister across 2 weeks when he needs to. He never runs a flame without confirming airflow first. He positions his stove near the ventilation shaft and monitors the flame color. A yellow, flickering flame means poor oxygen. A steady blue flame means adequate ventilation. This is not something he read online. This is something he was trained to assess in confined space operations. Navigation in the tunnels requires its own set of skills. The tunnel network is not labeled with helpful signs pointing toward the exit. Corridors branch and dead end without warning. In total darkness, it is remarkably easy to become disoriented, walk in circles, or stumble into an active rail section where a train will kill you before you hear it coming. He navigates using a system of physical markers he has placed throughout his section of the tunnel. Scratches on walls at specific heights, small piles of gravel arranged in patterns at intersections, a knotted rope system along one corridor that tells him by touch alone which direction he is heading. The Army calls this terrain association. He calls it not getting killed on the way to the bathroom. Perimeter security is where his military background becomes most visible. He has set up a detection system around his living space using tripwires connected to small noise-making devices. Tin cans with pebbles inside, plastic bottles positioned to fall and echo down the tunnel corridor. He sleeps in a position that allows him to reach his flashlight and his boots within seconds. He has mapped the tunnel section around his shelter for 100 yards in every direction. He knows every turn, every low ceiling, every place where someone could hide or where water rises during heavy rain above ground. He walks this perimeter daily. He refers to this as checking the wire, the same phrase soldiers use for inspecting the perimeter of a forward operating base. His daily routine runs on a strict schedule. Wake at 0500, check perimeter, conduct hygiene using water he has collected, eat a morning meal from stored supplies, usually canned goods, protein bars, or bread sourced from food pantries and soup kitchens above ground. He surfaces around 0700, timing his exit to blend with the morning commuter rush at a nearby subway station. He changes into cleaner clothes before surfacing. He keeps a separate set specifically for above-ground use, stored in a sealed plastic bag to keep them dry and free of the tunnel smell that would mark him immediately. Above ground, he moves through the city with a purpose that most people would not associate with homelessness. He visits specific food distribution points at specific times. He knows which churches serve meals on which days. He knows which organizations distribute clothing, hygiene supplies, and medical resources. He has this information organized in a small notebook he carries in his jacket pocket, written in a shorthand that looks almost like military operational notes. Times, locations, grid references based on cross streets, notes about which resources are reliable and which ones run out early. By early afternoon, he is usually back underground. He uses the remaining daylight hours, such as they are in a tunnel, to maintain his shelter, organize supplies, and handle repairs. He has a small battery-powered radio that he listens to for weather reports because temperature changes above ground directly affect conditions in the tunnel. A heavy rainstorm in Manhattan can send water rushing through tunnel sections within hours, turning a dry sleeping area into a flooded corridor. The social dynamics underground are more complex than outsiders realize. There are territories, there are alliances, there are conflicts, and there are rules, unwritten but enforced, about respecting other people's space and not bringing trouble that attracts police or outreach workers who might report the location of an encampment. He navigates this social landscape the same way he navigated relationships in the military. Respect the chain of command. Do not start conflicts you cannot finish. Offer help when you can, because the person you help today might save your life tomorrow. He has shared food, medical knowledge, and construction techniques with other tunnel residents. In return, he has received warnings about police sweeps, information about new supply sources, and the simple human benefit of conversation in a place where loneliness can destroy you faster than hunger. Because the physical challenges of tunnel life, the cold, the rats, the darkness, are brutal, but the psychological challenges are worse. Complete darkness does something to the human mind that is difficult to explain if you have not experienced it. The absence of natural light disrupts circadian rhythms, affects mood regulation, and can trigger depressive episodes that spiral into despair. Isolation compounds this. Days without meaningful human contact, weeks without hearing your own name spoken by another person. He fights this with the only tool that has never failed him: discipline. He maintains his schedule because the schedule gives him purpose. He maintains his shelter because the shelter gives him pride. He checks his perimeter because the perimeter gives him a sense of control in a world that has given him very little of it. He told an outreach worker once that the tunnel is not that different from the desert. Both of them are trying to kill you. Both of them are indifferent to whether you live or die. The only difference is that in the desert, someone was paying attention. That last part is what makes this story difficult to sit with. The United States spends over $800 billion a year on its military. It is the largest defense budget on the planet by a staggering margin. That money pays for aircraft carriers, fighter jets, missile defense systems, and overseas bases in dozens of countries. It pays to train soldiers like this man, to turn them into precision instruments of survival and combat effectiveness. But when those soldiers come home broken, the budget suddenly gets tight. The United States Department of Veterans Affairs estimates that on any given night, roughly 35,000 veterans are experiencing homelessness across the country. Black veterans are disproportionately affected, making up a significantly larger share of the homeless veteran population than their representation in the military overall. The reasons are layered and systemic. Discriminatory housing practices that have shaped where Black families can and cannot live for generations. Employment barriers that compound PTSD and other service-connected disabilities. Gaps in the VA healthcare system that leave veterans waiting months or years for the mental health treatment they need. And a military-to-civilian transition pipeline that works well for some veterans and catastrophically fails others. This man served his country. He followed orders. He put his body in the path of bullets and explosions on behalf of a nation that told him his sacrifice mattered. And today, he is applying the skills that nation gave him, not to defend a perimeter in a foreign country, but to survive in a tunnel beneath a city where apartments cost $4,000 a month. He was asked once what he would need to leave the tunnels. His answer was not complicated: stable housing with a locked door, access to consistent mental health support from someone who understands military trauma, A job that would not fire him the first time his hypervigilance made a coworker uncomfortable. And time. Time to rebuild a life that has been stripped down to its most basic elements. None of those things are impossible. None of them are unreasonable. And yet, for thousands of veterans across the country, they remain out of reach. The waiting lists are long, the funding is inconsistent. The programs that do exist are often designed by people who have never worn a uniform and do not understand that a man who slept in a combat outpost for 14 months cannot simply adjust to sharing a room with 5 strangers in a city shelter. The system was not built for him. It was built for a version of homelessness that is easier to solve and easier to photograph for a grant application. He does not feel sorry for himself. He made that clear. Self-pity is a luxury he cannot afford underground. The same way it was a luxury he could not afford in a combat zone. He adapts. He endures. He survives. That is what he was trained to do. But survival is not the same thing as living. And the distance between those two words is the distance between a tunnel beneath Manhattan and the life he was promised when he raised his right hand and swore an oath to a country that has not yet kept its end of the deal. If this story changed the way you think about who you walk past on the street, hit subscribe. There are more stories like this one. Stories about the people the system forgot and the ways they refuse to disappear. Now click the video on your screen because the next one goes even deeper.